Welcome back to Sidewalk, Skyline podcast. I'm Kevin Rogers, and I have a special guest today, Susan Wells, who has just released this little book. When I say little, I mean little. It's smaller than my face, and it's entitled "A Place at My Table: Creating Space to Belong." Over the years, Susan and I have crossed paths and even shared some meals at restaurants around the country. She and her husband, David Wells, currently reside in the Greater Toronto Area city, Burlington. So, Susan, welcome to the virtual table. Your book is all about tables. And unfortunately, I can't offer you a cup of tea today, but I've been looking forward to having this conversation. And true confession, I didn't read your book until yesterday. I took some time off yesterday to read through it. And let me just say, wow, you have a really good writing style. And there were several times I had to push back tears, especially when you were talking about these maritime women in your childhood that prayed for you early in your life. And wow. Got to ask the author question right off the hop. Have you ever written a book before, or is this your maiden voyage?
Interestingly, I've written articles about other people. I love to be inspired by the love of others. I have written a Canadian bestseller, but it was a decorating book. So
Really?
to answer your question, I've written a book before. My specialty for many years was, my company was about do-it-yourself decorating on a budget. I had a television show in Western Canada. And so I've done that, but certainly the first book of this kind, yeah.
Is that decorating book still available?
Oh, it's so out of date.
It's so out of date, yeah.
Oh yeah, decorating styles changed. So it was called Interior Design on a Dime, which my husband kind of rolls his eyes at. He knows that it really does cost more than a dime. So a lot of dimes sometimes.
Yeah.
But it was a good book for its time, and it helped the average person just work on their homes, make it better, and not have to spend a lot of money.
Yeah, I guess books on style can go out of fashion within a couple years. We're past the day of Dusty Rose and Slate Blue. And
who'd have thought that it would ever go out of style?
I know, eh? Reminds me of some churches that I visited that could use some updating in their style, but they're all, anyways. What I loved about your writing was this mix of personal story followed by spiritual reflections. I don't know if this happens when you're reading books, but it happens to me sometimes. I'm reading a book, and if the book is saying too much of the same thing, or it's stating the obvious, then sometimes my mind will drift off the page, and I'll have to come back and labor through the book. But I didn't have that happen once with your writing. You kept me all the way from start to finish. I only needed one nap in the middle, so so I could process things. Anyways, your spiritual reflections in the book, they weren't abstract reflections. They were your stories dovetailed to the spiritual lessons. So one thing that becomes very apparent in your story is the role of your dad and how that shaped you for good and bad. Part of your story was learning to walk in forgiveness when you were mistreated. And you talk about how he was an alcoholic, and when he was liquored up, he would become verbally abusive towards you and attack your faith. But then the next day when he was sober, it was, "Hi, little girl, and do you want some eggs?" And he just, friendly dad. And so you lived with this pendulum swinging your dad, and that can be so disheartening in a child's life, but really at any age, we can be disheartened by people that have that kind of unsteadiness. So talk about your dad and some of those difficult experiences. I'm sure that your story will resonate with others that maybe had to live with an alcoholic father. How has a lifetime of forgiveness shaped your view of others and who you are?
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a very hard time even saying anything negative about my dad. So even in the book, I wanted to offset his problems with the good parts. If as a friend, if you met him, he was gregarious, naturally gregarious and likable and funny. He was smart. He gave me my love of history. And as many who are familiar with people who are alcoholics, and he was a functional alcoholic. He was an engineer on the railway, and so he could go periods of time without drinking at all, and then went off work just to descend into bouts of drinking and the personality change. You never know which way it could go. He might get even more gregarious, but certainly the dark side could come through. So you did live in a fear of what could come next. So that was tough as a kid. And for whatever reasons, I'm naturally not a doormat. I have very strong social justice issues and what's right. And like any person, you have a strong sense of fairness, right? So, but for whatever reason, I could always see the best in my dad. And I think it was probably a spiritual component in my life. Obviously it would have been, but it's a big question when you even talk about going into forgiveness, right? So because I had a strong sense of faith as a young child that had been instilled in me and by a neighbor lady, but I did have a sense of seeing big picture, and I could see my dad always in this bigger light. It helped me through a lot of hard times. But I don't want to underplay that. It did hurt at the time. There's no doubt about it.
Oh yeah.
I'm not just floating above thinking about God. It hurt. Yeah.
Yeah, I think when people learn early in life that they have to walk in forgiveness, and set themselves on that path, you can still be hurt, but you don't wear those scars for life in the same way as when you allow resentments to set in. Another thing I liked in your book, you make friendships with people that are contrary, people that don't agree with what you believe, and that's been a very important part of your life. And in I think chapter 7, I just want to read something you wrote here.
Yeah.
In some circles, a philosophy evolved that the only reason for making a friend outside the church was to convert them. When I was a teen, we were encouraged to share our faith with our friends, but not truly be friends with them. This dichotomy can result in Christians never developing a genuine camaraderie with people who don't hold the same beliefs. They end up praying for souls without befriending the people that embody the souls. Boy, that's a powerful statement. Praying for souls without befriending the people that embody the souls. I also grew up in a similar way and struggled to reconcile it with what I read of Jesus in the Gospels and the way that he interacted with his world. And when I think about the tables that Jesus was called to sit at, and those that he invited to his table, we understand that love was more of his mission than carefully prepared prepositions that he needed to sell to potential customers. It reminds me that maybe this has happened to you, somebody you haven't seen for a while, haven't been close to, and they say, hey, we'd really love if you could come over for dinner, and then you find out that there was a motive that they were selling cookware or Amway or there was some ulterior motive that wasn't just about I want you at my table because I want to be your friend.
And you're never the same kind of friend after.
No.
You always see the person in a different light.
Yes, that's true.
Something gets lost. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we see Jesus at the table of tax collectors. We see people that were rejected in society, the wrong people. Jesus would go to their parties. And then we see his table where he invites his disciples to follow him, to walk with him, to dine with him. And when we think about Jesus at the Last Supper, everybody knows that painting, right? He's sitting in the middle of the table and he's got 6 guys on each side. But I was thinking about that. And if we painted the Last Supper with Susan Wells in the middle instead of Jesus, who would be at your table? And you can I want you to think about that. You can use fake names if you want, but I'm curious about the people in your life that you would deliberately choose to be at your table, and you can't include your husband or your kids.
Yeah.
Maybe your grandkids.
Yeah. First choice.
Yep.
Yeah. The longer you're in the church, and you've been in church circles a long time, so have I. Mm-hmm. You've got to really work to get outside those church circles because your natural life is just within it. And actually, it's a great part of your life and you don't have to stretch yourself. And so I will say that, kind of going back to that first quote you did, getting outside your Christian bubble, your church circle, does have to be deliberate. You got to, it just doesn't happen naturally, because before you know it, that's your whole life is kind of within this Christian realm. So I'd love to see at, say, the end of my life, if I could gather people that have meant a lot to me, it would be people like, and we may get talking about this, like this couple that were involved in my life that, you realize she's a prostitute, he's her pimp, and they found us, and so you get people that are just so unlovely to the average person. You get people like maybe even extended family that you looked up because you realize that God's calling me to my family. And people, I have someone that is in my life. It is a cousin, and he's been a Toronto Sunshine boy in those days a couple of times, and a business owner, but also fitness trainer, and at times part-time stripper. And so, as I said to people, it's not like when a woman is a stripper, almost it sounds like I'm defending it, but so I have people in common, like people that I don't have a lot in common from the outside. And then you think, how in the world am I even going to find anything to talk about? Like, how's business, right? You can't even go there. But even around the table, I think a big part of it would even be people within the church and church circles and younger people that we've been able to mentor, in a sense of just opening our home. And I sometimes, the good thing about social media now is people can get a hold of you decades later, and someone would get a hold of me and say, I remember the parties at your place, the sleepover with some gals, and I look back and there was no sermons, nothing, but the person at the time sharing, I was going through such a struggle, and I'm a teacher today, but I wouldn't have been a teacher. I'm doing what you did for other people, and it's because you had me over. Or a lot of the times, the people at my table would be people that you just kind of hung out with at the time and didn't try to be the super spiritual leader. Yeah. And that's maybe it would be a collection of people from within church circles and without that we worked hard to connect with, which is not easy.
Yeah. You've had, I'm sure, a lot of people at your table in a lot of places. I know that you and David have lived from multiple cities across Canada. And, that when you move around, you begin to see some of the uniqueness in the culture of a city or a province. You begin to see what people there are really valuing, what's important to them. But there's also this sense in which the place that we live is something that God uses to form our spirit. And our spiritual formation happens with geography. Mm-hmm. And so maybe talk about, I know of Edmonton, you guys were there. Were you in Calgary as well?
Yep, we have lived in Calgary. Yep.
Yeah. And Vancouver.
Yep, here in Burlington.
Burlington. Yeah. Any place I'm missing?
I lived in Red Deer for a while too. So
Red Deer.
Yeah. Those are the places in our lives, and you do realize people have problems no matter where they are. And in the book, I did talk a little bit about this couple, Marie and Cindy, which you had kind of mentioned. And so here you have this affluent city, right? And problem with that is you got people who think they've got it all together, but this pivotal kind of encounter that we had with Marie and Cindy, and I'm just jumping in, throwing that in here, is we don't even know how they got our names at all. We tried to figure it out. It was someone who knew someone, and it led back to the prairies. And they contacted us in this case because they had just found out that they just had a son, and just a routine blood test had shown that the son was HIV positive. So this goes back to the 90s, right? And it's just the scare of AIDS. And so basically, obviously the son was HIV positive because it came from one of the parents. And someone had told this Murray, who maybe had some sort of Sunday school experience, if they could find this David Wells, somehow he'd be able to help them. And so in the midst of affluent Vancouver, and one time, when we first met them shortly after, it was Father's Day. I thought, this baby won't be alive next Father's Day. Where can we meet that would be comfortable for them? And they came to church with us, and we had Father's Day at McDonald's. This was going to be his only Father's Day. Our kids came. Princess Diana made headlines for even touching someone with HIV. And here you've got a baby and the parents. And I was thinking, God, this family's got to have somewhat of a normal Father's Day here at McDonald's. I said to the kids, just wash your hands before you eat. And even with not knowing all the repercussions of being involved with someone like that, so we're right in the middle of an influential and affluent area of Vancouver, but we're sitting at a McDonald's with this family having a Father's Day dinner. I think my most special Father's Day dinner ever. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you've within the cities, there's just so many subgroups as well. I'll just jump in too, but I'll tell you a little COVID story. And we live near the center part of Burlington. And so we always say we have the worst house on the block, but it's not a bad house at all, but you go near the lake. And of course, within just a short walk, you've got mansions on the water. And my joke, and I really joke a lot, so you got to take this the right way. I'll say to my husband, I can only hope the people living in those mansions are not happy, just in a fake, jealous way. So during COVID, I'm out for a walk, maybe walking even more, and there's someone at a park bench, and I'm not that outgoing. I don't start talking to strangers automatically. There's a lady on her own, and I just happened to say, "Oh, do you live near here?" And she said, "Oh, I live right there." And it's this house that my husband always talks about, saying, "Do you think if all the kids came together, we all lived in one house, we could afford this house?" And I go, "No, we could only afford to live in the basement." But anyway, and I said to her, "Listen, I don't normally do this, but she was new to town. Her house was written up in the local paper. It's pretty iconic kind of home. But I said, listen, if you'd like me to show you around," and I said, "Here's my phone number if you'd like to use it." And that's the first time I've done that. I don't want to give a wrong impression. I'm not that gregarious, but we have struck up quite a friendship that the Lord has worked in. You realize here's this person in this incredible home on their own who's just had one tough thing, one tragedy after another.
Yeah.
And you do realize that, but so from the outside, you almost can't even let the appearance of affluence throw you off. And through this wouldn't have happened without COVID. And it's been pretty neat. Pretty neat, the things that have actually unfolded in 1 year with this person. Yeah.
I think you're learning or have learned to overcome your fear of being rejected by people, to say it's worth reaching out. And when you were talking in the story about Cindy and how you at one point you were thirsty and you said something about it, and so here's this prostitute with an HIV infected child.
Now full-blown AIDS at the time.
Full-blown AIDS, yeah. And we know so much more about AIDS and transmission and all that now, but at that time, their doctors, medical staff were afraid to go into the room with AIDS patients. So something inside you said, this is a risk worth taking. Talk about that.
Yeah, and this one particular incident with Cindy, it's a year plus later, and Manny has committed suicide. He realized he was the source of the HIV, did drug overdose, and she did very well for a while and came to church with us. And then I lose her while, if she did bad, she felt she couldn't contact me till she was doing well. But in this one particular case, when I mentioned about being thirsty, and she has a drink box and she has a straw, and she doesn't just hand it to me, she unwraps the straw, hands it to me with her bare hands, and she's back on the street. She's HIV positive, and she's been handled, and I do know enough that AIDS can be transmitted through fluids.
Right.
And so I did have a split second, and maybe it's good that I didn't have too much time to rethink it, that if I didn't take that straw from her, she would know exactly why. And I just had to trust God for that. And something just happens in you that you just love this person, that you are willing to risk everything. But I want to just be very honest about one thing. I never get past the fear. And some people think, someone said to me, oh, you just have this evangelism gift. And I feel like I don't actually. It's my passion. But if I wait till I get past the fear, I will never do anything. So I'm good at faking the fear. So even this walking with this person from this affluent house, I have all kinds of tension inside. And even like I was referring to this cousin with this lifestyle that resembles nothing of mine. I've decided, the Lord spoke to me once and said, Susan, you've got to quit assuming that no one wants to hear the gospel. You got to quit, instead assume that they want to. And so I just hang on to that. But I quite cleverly mask the fear. If you wait till you get past the fear, you'll never do anything. And some people maybe do, I don't, but I kind of step out despite the fear. But I just can't get past the fear of saying the wrong thing, jumping in too early. Or my biggest fear is, we're going to run out of conversation in 3 minutes. I have nothing in common with this person. That's my biggest fear. We're going to run out of things to talk about. Yeah. So it's very real, isn't it?
It is, yeah. But what an inspiration we take from Jesus, who he took incredible risks, touching the lepers, touching people that were ceremonially unclean in the culture. And there's you inspired me when I was reading some of those stories.
I'm going to throw this in, Kevin. Do you ever wonder where, and it does come up, where this feeling or this idea happened that if you hang out with a person with a certain lifestyle, that, oh, I don't want them to think I condone what they're doing. And when you look at the life of Christ, who just lived the opposite of that, is how did we ever get this feeling like we want to make sure we don't approve? They know from our lifestyle we don't live anything like them, so they know that's not.
You don't have to tell them.
You don't have to say anything. And what an incredible mistake this feeling has been that that somehow, I don't even know how you read the Gospels and come up with that, but it's really prevalent in the church, right? We feel like we have to say something so that they know we don't approve.
Yeah.
And I just don't let myself worry about that. It's very clear by my lifestyle where my heart is, and I want them to enjoy that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the cities that you've lived in. First of all, are you at heart a small town maritime girl, or are you a woman of the city?
I want it all.
You want it all.
Yeah, I want like everything in life.
Yeah.
You know what I want? I have small time values. I really enjoy the city. So my ideal place is to live within a city and all that a city can offer, but to live sort of in a type of community where it was always like you can walk to the coffee shop, right? And you don't have to get in the car. So I have an appreciation for the values of small town neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And yet all the amenities that a city offers, and being able to go and see things and do things. So unfortunately, like many things in my life, I do want it all. So I try to incorporate a little bit of both wherever I live somehow. Yeah.
What were some of the life lessons, things that God uniquely did, or a season in your life that were tied to particular cities?
Yeah. Moving to Vancouver, you can easily get overwhelmed by the affluence that you see. And we went to a church that had a bit of everything, but there was a lot of affluence there. So there I learned is you don't have to feel like you have to measure up to someone's expectations. Don't be embarrassed about who you are. And I did learn very much to be myself. And yet when you get to know people, honestly, we are all the same. You know, money doesn't, or affluence doesn't make a difference about what our daily struggles are. So to be very real. And one person made a comment, and Vancouver was such a different city to anything I'd ever been used to. So I actually had to make a conscious pledge to fall in love with the people of the place. And someone said to me later, "We knew that you loved us." And it comes through when you go, when you're new to a church or whatever. If you're part of somewhere else, people can tell. And so you have to make yourself so in love wherever you are, and even the things that you're not familiar with. And so Vancouver was a good lesson in that the outside, you know, can see the needs of people like, say, Manny and Cindy. Their needs are very evident, but it gets so easy just to be able to cover who we are with money and the things that money can buy. No matter, even if you're middle class, you can do that. So you get to realize that people are people. Don't try to be someone that you're not.
Yeah.
Don't try to be classier or put on airs, that kind of thing. Yeah. Vancouver taught me that.
Yeah. What about the Alberta cities?
Yeah, so Alberta, that kind of different too, especially when I first went there. I was straight from the Maritimes, and it was a gathering. You know, I came from a culture where people had been there for hundreds of years, were somewhat isolated, right, physically from many parts of Canada. So I did learn that how we're so influenced by our cultural heritage of how we respond. And so I'd never been in a community before. We had many people that were first generation, second generation from Germany, from the Ukraine or whatever. And I did learn that sometimes even people's response to humor, boy, did I learn the hard way that maritime humor does not translate with Danish people at all. And so that because you say something ridiculous, it's obviously ridiculous, or you wouldn't have said it. Like someone like thinks you meant what you said. So, so actually, sometimes you do. I did learn to actually start to read people, even people's personalities. Not that I had to change mine totally, but I had to change how I approached people. If they, from humor to other things, that they just saw life in very much, they were influenced by culture and even the hardships that their culture had gone through. So I did learn to, I want Susan always to be Susan. I don't want to be fake, but at times you can actually be a little more measured. So I learned a valuable lesson actually about sometimes just stop, read people, and then you won't get into trouble because as much.
Yeah.
I haven't.
Wait a minute, Susan. I'm just waking up to something you said about Danish people. David is Danish, isn't he?
I started not to make it too personal. And I love Scandinavian people. So, but you do, like, what a difference in humor. How you, I mean, okay. And if you watch, say, movies or anything from, just that whole area of Scandinavia, boy, people see life. It's just, so I'll tease my husband and going, there's a reason why you guys all want to commit suicide. I'm hoping no one on the podcast takes me wrong, but even humor is more measured and it's delivered in a different way.
Yeah.
I did learn, so when you meet someone, rather than just blather on or jump in or just assume everyone is like where I came from, just stop, just take a minute and just get to read them a little bit too, and it makes a difference even when you want to approach people. Even with the story of Christ and what he did, maybe you will tell the story. It's the same story, but you will tell it in very different ways, like what will connect with someone. And if it's humor, you can use humor, but if it's empathy, common interest, and I have learned with living in different cities too, sometimes you have to really dig to find something in common, but there's always something in common. And when you find it, just milk it for all it's worth. Yep. And make that kind of pivotal in your relationship. Yeah.
I got to say, my admiration for your husband, I've got nothing but great admiration for him, but it actually increased even more when you told the story about just shortly right after the wedding, when you guys got married, two of your visiting sisters, and you went to David and said, can we have my sisters stay with us and live in the basement apartment with us in your honeymoon years? And I thought, wow, there's a gracious man.
We were probably married less than 2 weeks. And I burst out crying, and he doesn't know why we're on our honeymoon. And my sisters had been out visiting. See, we could travel free by train with my dad being on the railway, and I just could. And back then, you never talked about things, but I could tell things were not good. And when I look back now and think, going back to a little basement suite and saying, can 2 16-year-olds live with us the rest of the summer? How creepy and weird that was. But it did kind of, there's hardly anyone, I didn't have the right to ask it, but he jumped in, and thankfully his mother took the girls for a lot of the time during the rest of the summer. But I did have this call to my family, and he recognized it, and it did set the tone for the rest of our lives and what our table would look like, for sure. The early 70s, when you first went out to Jasper and you were involved in outreach and the middle of the Jesus movement, where a lot of people from the hippie culture, or I would say the culture of youth at that time, were very experimental, very inquisitive, looking for a new set of ideals to follow, but many that were very, very open to, hey, I'm just going to look at everything. I'm going to try to find some answers. And what are some of your memories of being a young Christian, reaching out to hippies? Were you a hippie too? Yeah, I was hippie on the inside.
Hippie wannabe, yeah.
But anyway, I traveled to Alberta. Our church had set up this program where you could work in Jasper, and they'd get you a job, and then you work with a local church. All your spare time was the local coffee house. And it seems so strange now, doesn't it, that you could go to a park and someone have a guitar and start singing. Nowadays, if I go through a park and someone's even singing choruses or whatever, it just seems weird to me. And I think
Yeah.
here I am a Christian, but back then you just had hitchhikers, right? And people just traveling and wanting to experience, from drugs to whatever, somehow find this bigger meaning in life. So it really was a wide open time where, I remember, being part of a baptismal service, with new converts just in one of the lakes in Jasper. But at the same time, as wonderful as that outreach was, and it looks like I'm doing great things for God, I have the tension of what's going on with my family as well.
Yeah.
So I do want to throw in, because it might seem really brave to be talking to people in the park and all that, and it definitely was a time open to that. But at the same time, the real struggle and the toughest struggle, which will always be for all of us, is what's going on with our families and personal lives. And so that was still always this was like a cakewalk to what I was dealing with at home. But you have to be sensitive to the times too, and what's facilitating people's searching. And so this was just kind of in your face, right, with hippies and all that kind of thing. And nowadays you've got people, they're doing yoga, they're doing meditation. They're always looking for some sort of portal. And so how can you be there to help them find, I guess, the right portal, right? And but it was a fun and exciting time back then. Yeah.
Yeah, and such a time of awakening, so many people that came into the church at that time. And one of the things that I think we sometimes might want to resist is the changes that new people can bring to our lives and to our understanding of church. And so it was
I'm jumping in, but at the time, the church, some of the, I'm really careful when I say the church too, because it's but for many people, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to Christianity, right? The Jesus People movement was not overly welcomed by everyone, and all the changes that it brought in people coming to church and not knowing that they shouldn't have a shirt and tie on. So at the time, it was not always, it was like, the world's going to hell in a handbasket right now. And yet and in some ways it seemed to be, but yet God used that. And so churches that grew were those that were astute to realize, and pastors that would even step in and say, listen, we're going to welcome you. People that said, we're going to welcome you, as opposed to shun you. Right? And so what seemed to be like a horrible time was actually, I've read that the Jesus People movement will not get the credit for it because of the controversy, but probably was the single greatest revival, if you go by numbers, in church history. Nothing compares to the numbers that came to faith and stayed with faith. But as Christians, we study classic revivals, but the Jesus People revival outdid it all. But at the time, it brought all kinds of new problems too, and seemingly,
Oh, yeah. I wonder, if the climate is right in our world for another Jesus movement. And I would hope that we're more open as the church to people now. At least I know many people that are. And, we're constantly evolving and growing and mining down into the values of the gospel. So I want to ask you about, in the last 2 years, with all the restrictions, the limitation of gatherings, not being able to sit at tables with people other than covertly, or, we've had so many on and off restrictions around gathering. And I'm not just talking about churches, I'm talking about the whole world and how we're working through that. How has the last couple of years and the restrictions maybe challenged your understanding of hospitality. Is some people are living it to the letter of the law, and others are like Jesus, picking corn on the Sabbath. I know there's a restriction, but I really want to see my friend.
Well, it's interesting. The story of my coming to faith and my mentor, and it's my incredible story of my mentor, who she herself could not go to church because she had suffered from polio as a child, and and for many years in my formative years, I wasn't able to go to, say, an evangelical church where that really taught the full message of the gospel. So my coming to faith and spiritual formation had nothing to do with the church building. The person who was used of God to change my life and my entire family's life never got to go to a church building. And so maybe an advantage that has been to me, and I love church, I love gathering. It's not the same online. But having said that, I witnessed firsthand how when the building seemingly is taken from you, I don't even want to call it plan B. You got another plan, you got another way. And talking about the Jesus People movement, or now, I think the Bible always talks to us about knowing the times, understanding the times. What do you hear about all the time now? Increased suicide. And you hear about stress, you hear about that word. So where is the church? Where are church people in the midst of this? How are we stepping up? And so I've loved the way our churches have stepped up to serve communities, from getting groceries and all kinds of things. But personally, a couple of things have opened up. We got to meet a bunch of neighbors that we just never knew before, because a lot of times, depending on where your house is situated, you don't get to, but just a couple of blocks over, there were neighbors that starting to meet every Friday night at 7:00 on the street. Like, it's literally, on the sidewalk. Everyone pretty well has a glass of wine with them. I don't have one, but they're meeting, they're spaced. And so we find this group, and I said, we're going on our Friday night walk, and I just teased and said, are the Wellses able to come? And so in that group, though, we find that there's someone who grew up in the church. We know who the parents are and other people in the family are, but he drifted away. And so he finds out, that I'm married to, that my husband's a minister in this denomination. And so all of a sudden, like, we've connected with this person. And then who's actually his mother-in-law ended up being on the news because they didn't think she was going to survive COVID. And for whatever reason, they ended up in the news, but we're able to pray. And I'm able to even meet the husband of these in-laws and just say, we had a group praying for you, like COVID allowed for that. And this one neighbor from this very wealthy home on the lake. And so, we're not in homes. So one interesting story. So you walk a lot. And if you can meet in cafes outside, you do that. And so the table can change. But one interesting, just a little story about this one person, after walking for about a year, she says to me, I feel like I should go to church, like when I can. And I was like, I can't believe it. Like, you brought up the subject of church. And so she kind of mentions it in passing, and I'm thinking, how can I work this out? And then I'm getting anxious, like, can I just, and my church will be so different than hers. How can I work this out? Well, within a few days of that, we had a new pastor come to our church. We didn't know who he was. It's COVID, right? It's online services. Pretty well no one has met this pastor except for staff. So we get to meet them, and we go down for a walk by the lake, and we come by, and here's this new COVID friend of mine. And so I don't know why it's 8:30 in the evening, and our friends say, well, we need to get home to our kids. And so I introduce our pastor and his wife to her, and she goes, would you like to have tea? And so we say, oh no, it's okay, because we're on our way. And then it's like the Lord just stopped me, like, why are you giving this up? And I kind of mouthed to Dave's talking to her, and I mouthed to, can we stay? So they were like, sure, we can stay. So here she is, 8:30, and she's bringing tea out to her table. It's actually overlooking Lake Ontario, and we're there for 45 minutes talking. And I'm thinking, almost no one in the congregation has had this one-on-one time with this pastor. But my COVID friend has, who happened to mention about searching for a church. And I thought, God, you work out things that we can't figure out. That's providential. But I had to have been there for that year working with her first, right? Not when I say like walking with her, being her friend, that led to that. So things will pop up when you're already in motion, just doing whatever. And we walked 2 days ago and I still have this fear. When are we going to run out of things to talk about? What do I say? It's just a crazy fear that will allow me to work through. So COVID has brought opportunities. And so rather than whining, and we do have to realize, and I love all the ministries of church buildings and within the buildings, but we've got to just say, God, help me to read the signs with my neighbors. What can I do? And so it's a stretch. It's a stretch. I'm way more comfortable in church.
Well, one more thing before we go. I'd love for people to be able to order your book. And there is a website, a place at mytable.ca. And then we'll put all of the ordering instructions into the show notes for the podcast. But anything you want to say about getting a hold of your book?
Yeah, if you can, at the back, and it'll be written down, you can always write to me, Susan at a place at mytable.ca. And I'm working on a companion book, actually, a bit of a study, further study that will go along, like what are the biblical principles in this, and how can I even dig a little bit deeper than some of the reflections. So I'd love to dialogue with people, and even at a place at mytable.ca, as I just put some articles in that refer to the book and just some life lessons for us.
Yeah. Well, Susan, I've so enjoyed being with you today, and very enriched by what you have to write. And when you get the companion guide done, I hope you got another book in you, because you got a lot of good things to say.
Thanks so much. Yeah.
That was Susan Wells. Be sure to order a copy of her book, A Place at My Table. Speaking of tables, somebody that has been a close friend of mine over 35 years, Paul Sherrill, is a man that I've sat at the table with many times. And I'm standing here in front of Metropolitan Hospital in Windsor, where currently he serves as a chaplain. And in the next episode, I'm going to interview Paul, and we're going to talk a lot about what it's like in the hospital world in terms of chaplaincy. He did his training at Mercy Hospital in downtown Detroit, and has worked here in Windsor in Metropolitan Hospital, the Hotel Dieu healthcare system, as well as for several years being the chaplain at our hospice. And there's a wealth of information to be gleaned, a lot of wisdom in this upcoming conversation. So until the next time, I'm Kevin Rogers, your host of Sidewalk, Skyline podcast.